All right, welcome everybody to this week's installment of Midrash and the Parsha. We're going to look into divine law and order for Parshat Mishpatim. So yesterday, we all were hopefully wowed by the experience of Har Sinai, whether we were in shul or we read it on our own, about how awe-inspiring as well as world-shattering, seemingly, the giving of the Aseret Dibrot, the Ten Commandments, were. So after that, what would you expect to be the next step? Before I go on to the next stage, before I look at the sources, what would you expect to happen next?
You'd expect someone to teach what they're about.
Right. You expect, so that's one option, right? We got the Ten Commandments, so give us more about like what those mean. But what ends up happening? What are the immediate commandments we get? The bulk of them. So the bulk of them are actually laws. Not yes, there are a couple of laws referring to how to serve God that we had last portion, but most of them are from between one man and another man, and they're also not particularly crazy, new, seemingly divinely inspired. They're just straight laws for social justice and fairness. So what's going on here, right? Why is that what happens? So that's the Midrash. The Midrash we're going to learn this week is going to be discussing why do we go straight from the Ten Commandments and Har Sinai? Why is the first thing that's important for us to know are the laws? Okay, so before we see the so here we have the Midrash's answer, but I'd like to see besides the Midrash's answer, what answers does anybody else happen to have? Why would you think it's important to have law? Like, why is law so important?
Well, they came from being slaves, and they were ruled over their masters, and they didn't. You have to have a sense of justice that they weren't used to.
Right. So maybe they weren't used to sense of justice. But another option is that normally what happens if you have a very spiritual experience, sometimes you think that, all that matters now is spirituality, and the other people around me don't matter. All that matters is me and my spirituality, which, was the mistake of the Second Temple. Why was the Second Temple destroyed? Not because they weren't serving God properly. Rather, right, they were. But the issue was they weren't, serving, one another properly, right? Their ben adam chavero, their interpersonal mitzvot, left much to be desired. So perhaps that might be part of it, but we'll see. So let's dig into the Midrash. Again, I'm going to be asking for volunteers to read. If you feel comfortable reading, please feel free. If not, not to worry. Okay. It says, hi, Grandma. Okay, yes, you get on. Good. Okay. So we are now at the Midrash. We're just getting started. The question is, why do we go straight from the Ten Commandments to laws between man and man? Why are these laws so important? So who'd like to read Rabbi Elazar's answer?
Okay, I'll read it.
Thank you, Elaine.
Rabbi Eliezer said, the whole Torah hangs on judgment. That is why the Holy One gave laws of justice after the Ten Commandments, because people cross the line of justice, are punished, and this teaches the whole world.
Okay. Because what is the most important part of the whole Torah is based on this, and this is one only thing? Justice, right? Deen. The fact that you observe the basic laws from man to man, which, right, not necessarily intuitive. You'd have thought, what do you mean? That's not the biggest chiddush, the new idea put forth by Judaism. It's not that you didn't have laws like that; those have existed before. So this is trying to teach you otherwise. Or this say no. The most important part of the Torah is the laws, the dinim, the justice system, not the way you serve God. So in case you have a question about that, so now the Midrash is going to be giving us some examples. Okay, so there's two times we see what happens to the world when there is no justice, when there is no deen. So the first time, hopefully, both of them are relatively violent. So let's go with the first one. So the first one, the case of Sodom. So as far as what did Sodom do wrong that led to its destruction? So from the story in Bereshit, it appears that the issue is primarily with, we don't really see exactly why. They're Rishon, they're wicked. We don't see the extent of what their wickedness is caused by. Right? It's not abundantly clear. There we do see, after the ready decree for destruction, how they try, basically lynch Lot and his daughters, as well as the messengers of God who are with them. But we don't necessarily see what they did until that point that declared them as being wicked. But not to worry, it is filled in not only by the Midrash, but is also mentioned throughout the rest of Tanakh. So one of those times it is mentioned is in the book of Yechezkel. So there it says, Sodom was not overturned until it crossed the line of justice, as it says, pride, abundance of bread, and careless ease. Okay, so as far as exactly what those mean, let me skip ahead of slides. Let's read the full verse in Yechezkel itself. Okay, in case you're not sure, this is a direct full quote. So I brought you the whole verse in Yechezkel. So here on the left. Okay, only this was a sin of your sister Sodom, arrogance. What do we mean? She and her daughters had plenty of bread and untold tranquility, yet she did not support the poor and the needy. So this is saying that despite them having ample means, we know that Sodom was rich. That's why Lot chose the Sodom to begin with. So the issue was the fact that despite them having the means to do so and their means to do justice, meaning to those who poor and needy and needed their help, instead they decided not to extend their hand, and that's why all of Sodom was worthy of being razed to the ground. So as far as the importance of justice, seems to be a pretty strong requirement.
But don't we know that even from the Torah, because that's the reason why they rebelled against Lot, because they didn't believe in Hachnachas Orchim, and they saw Lot was letting in the Malachim.
Right, but remember that's afterwards, right? So then we only see that after they've already been decreed for destruction. Right? So the question is what led up to that point, right? And then how did they get there? So it's not that, what did they do wrong? So the question is at what stage along, as at a certain point, it turned to the point where they are, anybody who's different, they're willing to lynch them on the spot. But the question is what led to that conclusion? All right, you don't simply wake up one day and decide that I'm going to kill everybody else who doesn't live here. That's not a standard normal reaction to have. So how did they get there? The way they got there was initially everybody was very interested in themselves, right? They had plenty of food, they had plenty to drink, and their greed decided they would never share it with any other person. Which then, when it reaches the most extreme, leads to you have guests, we will lynch them. Right? So that's the eventual, the extreme end of it, which is why they definitely deserve to be destroyed. But things like, how do they get along that path to bring themselves to being worthy of being destroyed? This was the first step, right? Despite having all the means to do so, right? In a society that finally has sufficient food, the first thing you're supposed to do is try and make lives better for everybody around you, right? That's like the basic. Once you get past, hunter-gatherer, subsistence farming, right? The next logical step is, now that I have enough, you should try and help others. When you don't, that's the real problem. And that's similar to what's happening here. Does that make sense, Nathan?
Maybe they didn't believe in socialism.
So this is a little bit more than socialism. This is there's socialism light, and then there's extreme, what would it be, not racism, it'd be more like xenophobia. Where the xenophobe is anybody who's not in your town. It's a very sharp turn. And that's why Sodom is destroyed by God, because again, that is a very strange and terrible things that have happened and is very unique to Stone. Yeah, there are other times in history where something has happened, but we will leave those for another time.
And yet the Ten Commandments, if I recall correctly, it doesn't give any hint to sharing with others. There's all sorts of things it says, be good to people. Don't covet what your neighbor has, your neighbor's wife, his car, his possessions, etc. But nowhere does it say give tzedakah, share with people. I mean, the Torah does, but not the Ten Commandments themselves.
So this week's parsha gets to that, though. It talks all about, make sure not to damage other people, mitzvah tzedakah, like all those things, charity, like all those, a lot of several other things about welfare. They start coming up in this week's parsha. So there's several different parts of the law, right? So what Stone's primary sin was their greed and their refusal to do justice despite having the adequate means to do so, right? So that's where Stone crossed the line. So the question is, where exactly did, right? So there's a lot of different laws that are included in Mishpatim. The question is, which one did you violate that leads you to going over the edge? So that's what we're going to have to see. So we mentioned one already, right? So now we just have the case of Stone. What caused Stone to go over the edge, right? So that is one of the laws mentioned in Mishpatim. But there's other laws also mentioned in Mishpatim. The question, we're using our limits case as not law by law case, but as in when refusal to follow properly in the laws of God will lead to your death and destruction. So here we have, the next one we go straight from Stone to Yerushalayim. So it's a pretty, right, you may think like, oh, only Stone, they're the only wicked ones that could ever happen to. It can't happen to Jews. No, it couldn't possibly, well, I mean, yes, it did. So as far as even, again, there's the holy city of Yerushalayim juxtaposed to the most wicked city of Stone. So who would like to read about why Jerusalem was destroyed? This is not the one you normally hear. Normally the one you'd hear for why Yerushalayim was destroyed is because they were doing the big three, right? Gilui Arayos, Shvilas Damim, and Avodah Zarah. They were doing, murder, illicit relations, and idol worship, right? That's the ones that people normally remember that we hear on Tisha B'Av. That was what the first temple was destroyed for. But there's other reasons given by the various Nevi'im, the various prophets throughout the ages. And so here we have the example of what Yeshayahu pegs the reason for the destruction of Yerushalayim. Okay, so who would like to read about the destruction of Jerusalem? And hopefully prevent us from repeating the same mistake.
Yeah, I'll read again if no one else will. Even Jerusalem was not exiled until she crossed the line of justice, as it says, the orphan they do not judge, and the quarrel of the widow does not come to them, from Isaiah.
Okay, right. So now let's look a little bit more into what exactly is this referring to. So let's head over to the next here to the full pasuk. Okay. So it's not just that that you did. The question is, who's the one who's perpetrating these terrible acts? And in what sense? So everybody sees on the right there. Okay. So it's not only a critique. So the critique is the original puzzle is a little broader. Okay. So it says your rulers are rogues and cronies of thieves. Yeah, these are just translations from again, all the translations for today are from Sefaria. This one in particular is the English translation of JPS 1985. Just in case you like translation and you want to go buy it, that's the book. So so your rulers are rogues and cronies of thieves, everyone avid for presents and greedy for gifts. So what happened? So what similarity do we have to the previous verse? Right. What's the first half? Does this sound familiar? Before we get to the part that we quoted in the Midrash of they do not judge the case of the orphan, the widow's cause never reaches them. What is the similar cause we have between the Jews of Jerusalem as well as Stone? What do they seem to both have in common? right? What's the initial cause for both of their eventual demises?
They're greedy and they don't take care of the orphan and the widow.
Right, they're greedy and they don't take care of others, right? Both of them. So the question is, so why is it so important that we go straight from the start of with the Ten Commandments and being at Har Sinai? The first thing we need to learn about is about how to have a just society and give justice one to another. Because if we don't have that, we can very easily give in to our own greed, and immediately, instead of working to build ourselves up, instead we will start to destroy ourselves from within and start being terribly wicked. Not the poor and the needy, and the exemplary sons of the poor and needy are the widow and the orphan, because they do not have anybody to support them. Right? Because again, orphans and widows tend to be some of the most unfortunate in society, because again, they don't have the normal family structures in order to actually support them the way that most people would. Okay. So, and the saga continues. Okay. So now we mentioned about what can lead society as a whole down the bad path. The Midrash continues. The Midrash starts talking about why is Yehuda why is the tribe of Yehuda where kingship comes from. So what do we think? Why is Yehuda the king? So again, I gave a share this earlier this year, and actually, if I'd known this about this Midrash then, I probably would have simply had quoted this Midrash instead of giving everybody the long share. This Midrash says it very succinctly and clearly. What is special about Yehuda, and why does the tribe of Yehuda become king? So here we go. So, and why did the Holy One give the crown to Yehuda? He is not the sole mighty one from amongst his brothers. Are not Shimon, Levi, and the others mighty as well? Rather, it's because he gave true judgment to Tamar. Therefore, he was made judge of the world. This is like a judge before whom an orphan's judgment comes, and he finds in her favor. So to Yehuda, Tamar's judgment that she should be burned came before him, and he found in her merit, because he found merit in her. So, and the Midrash could, so this doesn't mean that you should, pervert the judgment to rule in favor of the widow. That is not what is being mentioned here. What's mentioned here is that a lot of times in judgment, you tend to give favor to the one who's, rich and powerful, because if you give him a solid, then he'll give you a solid later. And that is something that we cannot have. Not only that, the Midrash then continues. The one issue here, again, is fair judgment to the widow who had nobody to defend her, right? Everybody threw her under the bus. She was about to be burned at the stake, yet Yehuda stands up for her. But also worthy of note is that the only reason why she was about to be burned is because of Yehuda to begin with. So now the Midrash
wasn't Yehuda the one who said she's going to be burned at the stake till Tamar gave her the signs?
Correct, right? Yehuda was the initial judge who sentenced her to death by burning at the stake, until Tamar offers the proof of her saying, whoever has this signet ring and the staff, and as well as this cord, whoever has these three things is actually the father of the child was pregnant with. And if not for that, then Tamar would have been burned at the stake. But the answer is the exact point. What was Yehuda? You had a very good option, which was ignore her evidence. The answer is, despite the fact that Yitzchak and Yaakov were sitting there as well in judgment, and all of his brothers were covering for him, right? Yehuda had absolutely no reason to admit. He could have simply said, he could have ignored the rings. He could have said, I have no idea who those are. I don't care who the child is. You still deserve to be burned at the stake. But instead, what does he do? Instead, Yehuda acknowledged God. And he spoke the truth of the matter, saying that she is more right than I am, and therefore God made him worthy of being the prince, of being the king. So what is the important part here is that it's not that he was forced into admitting. He had every ability to dodge it. He could have covered it up nice and easily, but instead he decided to do the right thing, and that's what we need in a leader. We don't need a leader who, simply covers for themselves and makes sure they stay in power. What matters is a leader who's able to do the right thing, even if it might come at a personal price. And as far as that goes, so we have another story in the Midrash supporting this as well. So in Zoma, right? So if you see the title, right? Do not be ashamed to admit, right? There's no shame in admitting that you made a mistake. So Ben Zoma used to say and explain, if you were ashamed in this world, you will not be ashamed of the Holy One who is a consuming fire in the world to come. Why? Because the shame of this world is nothing more other than the shame of one standing in the coming world, as it says, for this let every pious man pray to you. Okay, so this is a little cryptic. So he's saying that if you were able to withstand embarrassment in this world, if you're able to stand before whatever embarrassment you may have in order to do the right thing, then you are considered to be an utterly righteous person, and no matter how intense the flames of God are when you stand in judgment in the world to come, you will be able to survive it. And why does that fit very well with Yehuda, as well as we mentioned about social justice? The important part about justice is that you have to keep it. It doesn't matter why. You may say, but I don't. The answer is you do the right thing, not because it's being convenient or because you look good. The reason why you do what you're supposed to do is because it's the right thing to do. It's because God is telling you you should uphold justice, do what is right. Even if it may seemingly cost you something, it is more than worth it, and it is the only way to properly end up serving God. So in order to better understand what exactly we mean by that and why Ben Zoma says this, it'll help us if we take a look at the psukim themselves in this parak of Tehillim. So in the next slide, I brought you the first 6 verses of Tehillim, Chaf Bet. Okay, so we have the Hebrew on the right and we have the English on the left. Okay, so this is towards the beginning of Tehillim. So we're going to go through these 6 psukim, and we'll see. Hopefully, this will help us learn about the importance of admitting your mistakes and why that's an important thing to be able to do in order to have a just society. Okay, so here, so the beginning words of David Maskil. So that's basically saying. So let's say this is a certain type of Tehillim written by David, a certain type of psalm. So, okay, so that's like the little title, what it is. So then what is, and then the verse continues. So happy is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered over. Okay, the word that we see being used here is the term ashrei, which again we say this term every day. It also is the first word of Tehillim as well. Ashrei, praiseworthy is the person, happy is the man. Okay, so happy is the man whom the Lord does not hold guilty and whose spirit there is no deceit. As long as I said nothing, my limbs wasted away for my anguish roaring all day long. For night and day your hands lay heavy on me, my vigor waned as in the summer drought. Okay, so what is going on here? So as far as this Tehillim is referring to, so we have David HaMelech saying, talking about how great is a person who God ends up forgiving for what he has done wrong. So the question is, what sin do we think that David is referring to in this instance? What do we think?
With Bathsheba?
Correct. Right, with Bathsheba, right? So this is a sin that he tried to cover up. Most likely referring to his sin with Bathsheba, which is perhaps his most public sin, as well as the one for which he tried to cover up and had quite dire consequences. Could have been. They're also could be referring to other ones as well, but we'll go with that one for now. Okay, so he starts out by talking about how good somebody could be forgiven, and now he mentions about how he felt while he had sinned and was covering it up. How did he feel while he was pretending that he didn't do anything wrong? That is what we have from as long as that's from the third verse, right? As long as I said nothing, my limbs were wasted away from my anguish roaring all day long. For night and day your hand lay heavy on me, my vigor waned as in the summer drought. So that is the degree at which guilt can consume, as well as how and how he felt while having to do this. Right? He realized what he's doing is wrong, but he still was unable to admit at that point. And that's the point. This is how he felt because of what he was doing. And then what happens? We get to verse 5. Okay, so as everybody sees where my mouse is over here, but then, or in hey, we see the word chatati. Right? I have sinned, which is one of the unique praiseworthy things of David, just like we saw by Yehuda, that he is willing to admit when he did something wrong. And that is a very strong token that you need if you are to be a leader, that you have to acknowledge your sins and admit that you did what you did wrong. So let's read the verse inside. So then I acknowledged my sin to you. I did not cover up my guilt. I resolved, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. And then finally we see, and then again, this is all leading up to the verse that we had to quote, the Midrash quoted, right? The Midrash quotes only at the end. After this whole back and forth we had, we start off by with David Amelech saying about how bad things, how great it is you could actually admit your sins and get repentance. Goes through his feelings of guilt while he had not yet to admit. He then says how he admits his sins. Then he says, and how thankful he is for God having forgave him. And then the last verse we have is, therefore let every faithful man pray to you upon discovering his sin, that the rushing mighty waters not overtake him. So the last verse we only quote is that whoever thinks that they're a chassid, they're devoted, faithful to God, they have to immediately pray upon this discovery, right? If they don't pray, then there will be if you don't pray, you don't admit to God what you did wrong, then you may have done things wrong, but it will consume you, and you will end up going down the dark path. So here we see this verse as a culmination of this whole story of David potentially going down the wrong path. He finally makes it back to the straight and narrow. And that's why he's ending with his line, every man, should immediately pray and ask for forgiveness when he does something wrong, because if you don't acknowledge you did something wrong, you can very easily slip down the wrong path. And what is that wrong path? That wrong path is what happened with what we saw by Sodom, and what also we see what led to the destruction of Yerushalayim and the first Beit HaMikdash. Is that despite the fact that, again, you may say, just a small slip up here. It was just, I just stole a little bit. I just did a little bit wrong. I didn't observe this law between one man and another man. The issue is that if you start covering up for each of your sins, eventually it will lead to something far greater, until the point where you actually are worthy of destruction, as happened to Sodom and Jerusalem. Okay, anybody have any questions? Okay, so I'm just going to run through again what we covered, just to make everything clear. Okay, so again, we discussed divine law and order. Why do we go from the 10 Commandments straight to the to seemingly relatively mundane and boring laws? So the answer is we do that because if you don't follow law and justice, it will very easily lead to you going down the wrong path and making you worthy of destruction by God, as happened to Sodom and to Yerushalayim. And it's important. And then the Midrash continues to talk about the examples of Yehuda, and then later we see referenced by the Midrash also that of David, of how even though there are times you may end up sinning, it's important to realize that to immediately admit that when you did something wrong and you had made a mistake in justice, because if you don't immediately admit your mistakes, it can lead to you going to a much darker path and potentially in a revocable direction, and then you'll be unable to return. Okay. Anybody have any questions? So, okay, so just want to let everybody know that next week we are not going to be having a shir on Midrash, because there will be a pre-Purim learn-a-thon with Beit Midrash Zichron Dov. I will be sharing the. I'll be sharing the. We'll give you a link to it in your emails, and if any other questions, feel free to ask them. Okay, so that'll be again next Sunday night. There will be a program instead. Okay.